Here we are over on the Doctor Who channel with the Hodd. We're going to talk a little bit about Brexit, the Scottish independence thing, with an American and an Australian and, somewhat objective points of view on it, right? Because we're not actually there. So we have a somewhat of an objective point of view of it.
Yep.
So we're going to talk a little bit about it. I got something coming up later on my channel later on in about 4.5 hours. It's a show where Ian Blackford, a leading member of the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, was on Good Morning Britain, I believe it's called. Piers Morgan, and anyway, and it's a little bit of back and forth between those two. So I got uploaded that for later tonight. So right now we were going to talk a little bit about the whole issue. So for me, there's a lot of things going on here. You get a lot of the conservatives are getting angry at the Scots because they want to leave, and they're seeming to take this attitude that the Scots are being unreasonable by wanting to leave or something along those lines. And the Scots are basically just the SNP and those that are fighting for or who are looking for Scottish independence are basically saying, look, we just want to be able to choose our own road. Some of the backstory here is that back in 2016, or was it 2014 or 2016, there was a referendum where Scotland got a chance to vote to become independent. There was a big big thing, from the, Scottish Parliament, the Conservatives and everything, where they said it's better together. We're better together. They put out a lot of, let's all love each other kind of vibe, and let's all move forward together. And part of it was that that they had to reassure Scotland that they wouldn't be taken out of the EU. That was kind of part of it. And so Scotland eventually voted to stay in the UK. Okay, that's what happened then. Now we're faced with this situation now, okay, where Brexit is happening, and the SNP and the Scottish Nationalist Party is saying, look, now we're being taken out of the EU, which is exactly what we didn't want. This is a significant change, and that is what is required for there to be another referendum. Is that it's a significant change that is unpopular with the majority of the Scottish people. And the fact is, the majority of Scottish people do want to remain in the EU. The polls show that. So that's where this is headed. And as long as the whole Brexit thing continues, it's going to continue to give rise to the Scottish independence conversation. And this is just my analysis of it, and I'll give Mark a chance to speak here in a second. He can either shoot down or confirm what I'm saying. But the thing is that the Scottish independence argument would lose all weight tomorrow if Brexit was abandoned. If Brexit was abandoned, the Scottish, they wouldn't even have the precedent in order for them to ask for a referendum. Without Brexit, there isn't a significant enough change in the government to warrant the referendum vote. And that's, I think, where this would end up. So it's an interesting thing to watch this as it's playing out. It's interesting. But ultimately, what I want is what's best for the Scottish people. Not so worried about Englandshire. I'm worried about the people in Scotland more than I am them. So your thoughts, Mark?
God, this is a huge topic.
Yeah, it
I
is.
will try to be brief if I can on the background. I have lived in Europe for various periods of time, and so I'm familiar with a European experience, and equally in the UK, or in England at least, in the UK. So I try to go back to some basic principles here. I mean, the United Kingdom joined the European Union for the common good, and whilst this wasn't a perfect union, the United Kingdom has benefited greatly by being a member of the Union, of the European Union. But over time, like a lot of organisations, various members get a bit disgruntled about how the organisation has been run. And that was true with the United Kingdom and a number of the European rules. A lot of which were based upon problems or perceived problems about open borders, where European people can just come into the UK and at will, pretty much, without a lot of control or integrity behind crossing borders. But also there were a lot of decisions that were otherwise being held and conducted in the UK from their own legal and other points of view that were now handled by the European Parliament. Anyway, I'm not going to go too much into that detail, except to say that there was a lot of, unhappiness, I guess, within the UK. And back in, forgive me if I get these dates wrong, but somewhere in around about April 2015, I think it was, I could be a year out, the then Prime Minister David Cameron agreed, as part of a lead up to an election, that he would give people a vote on the membership to the European Union. No detail, just do you want to be a member, yes or no? Herein lies the flaw in what happened, because for two reasons. One, there was no detail, so people didn't know the implications of voting one way or the other. And secondly, as a consequence of that, they had a simple majority, that is more than 50%, then that would be, an affirmative result, rather than what is normally the case for major governmental decisions. You would have a minimum of 60-40 type vote to make sure you're not leaving behind a large chunk of the population who don't agree with the decision. The ultimate result across the United Kingdom was 52 to 48%, which is a 2% swing. In other words, 2% would bring it back to 50-50. So it passed, but passed without any detail, without any understanding of what that implication was. Now, notwithstanding that, in Scotland, they didn't want, their votes didn't want to leave the European Union. So they, as a country, were in favour of staying. And in London, a city, England's obviously the largest city, I think about 10 or 12 million people, their votes were to stay in the European Union. But nonetheless, there were lots of other areas that thought they should leave. So from that time of that referendum to now, there have been various efforts focused upon coming to some understanding or some way to exit the European Union that everyone would be happy with. Well, that was, as we know, an exercise that was never going to bear fruit in a way that everyone would be happy with.
Right.
So it brings us back to this basic issue, and I'll link that to the Scottish issue very quickly, is that Parliament in any nation gets its authority from the people. It doesn't get it from their own personal views about things. You get your authority to do things from the people. So in my view, my personal view is I think the UK would be better off staying in the European Union. That's my personal view, for a whole host of reasons, which I won't go into. But what should happen is that the first referendum back in 2015, if I have that date right, was an affirmation to go and investigate the possibility of leaving. That's the way I see it. And they should come back with a plan that says, this is now what we think, what we would propose to do, and these are the implications of choosing A or B, that is to remain or to go. Please give us your affirmation that you still wish to leave. That, to me, is a proper democratic process, where you're taking authority from the people in your decisions, because the authority that was granted in the 2015 referendum was authority based on no knowledge at all, or no detail. People were voting emotionally, oh yeah, that'd be a good idea, blah, 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 or not. So I just think the whole process has been flawed, and the only proper way to deal with that as an issue is to go back to the people with an informative referendum. Now, let's just take that issue very quickly back to the whole issue of Scottish independence. Now, Scotland is its own country. It happens to unite with the rest of the other countries for common good, but it is its own country. Now, the way I see it is there are many countries around the world that are relatively small in population, that develop and evolve very successfully in when they're small. I mean, a great example of that would be a country like New Zealand, for example, which has a very small population. Um, Scotland, I've mentioned this to some other people. The way I see it is Scotland is a mature nation that can act on its own, make its own decisions. It should be enabled to do that, but it doesn't in any way. Even if it acts on its own, doesn't mean it doesn't, still have the connections back to England or Wales or Northern Ireland. That it's a brotherhood of countries based on heritage
Right.
and commonly shared values. We have in Australia we have one of our best national friends are the New Zealanders across the Tasman Sea.
Mm-hmm.
We're independent nations. We have different views on certain things, but mostly common views. We're proud about our independence, but we support each other no matter what, always. So this kind of fear mongering that somehow that Scotland leaving the United Kingdom would suddenly be bad for everyone else in the United Kingdom, or it would create some problems. That's just not found based in any sort of reasonable analysis of how humans behave. And I
Right.
think it's only fair that if the Scottish people do want independence, and it's up to them, not to anyone else, if they
Right.
do want independence and they have a well thought through plan to achieve that, so it's not just a reckless decision,
Right.
because there's lots of implications for that. Well, then let them do it.
Yeah.
That's their country. It's not
Yeah.
for others to tell them how to live their lives. They're a very successful and highly intelligent and very capable and well-resourced country that has, as I see it at least, a fabulous um, First Minister in Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, I like her.
Um,
She's strong and
yeah,
yeah,
let
she's
them
good.
have what they want. But I mean that's based upon the people wanting it, of course, the Scottish people. So if the Scots have their own referendum and say, yeah, we want to be independent, and provided that's again, there should be a reasonable, more than a simple majority referendum. I always believe in that on big issues.
Right.
Then they should go ahead and do it, and um, you know, for Scots and for the rest of the brotherhood, if I can call it that, it'll be a stronger organisation as a result because people will be happy with what they've got. Now,
Right.
that may well have some implication, because Scotland wants to stay in the European Union, as does the Republic of Ireland, who is the Republic as distinct from Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is its own country, which
Mm-hmm.
is the physical largest part of the landmass that is Ireland.
Right.
Um, so it's a EU member, and that's been one of the difficult issues with this current Brexit discussion is how you're going to create a new border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, or potentially create a border that introduces custom controls and immigration controls on a landed border that the Irish people themselves, that is the totality of Irish people, that is the Northern Irelanders and the Republicans, don't want. They don't want that. They don't want to feel that there's them and there's us. So there may be some issues associated with if Scotland was independent and remained in the EU, and if England decided that it wanted to leave, there may be some border issues there. But good minds and good intent should resolve that in a way that makes sense. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of words. I raved on a bit, but you need that background information to understand
Yeah.
where this comes from. But
Sure.
the foundation issue is that the authority should exist with the Scottish people.
Mm-hmm.
With their good wishes and with good planning, they should be allowed to do what they want to do.
Well, I agree that the Scottish people have reason, I believe, to feel like their concerns and their what concerns them is being kind of dismissed when you watch some of the things that happen in Parliament when
Yes,
Scottish SNP gets up to speak, or folks like that, and you see like the whole place emptying out, and things like that. It's just like a lot of disrespectful stuff towards Scotland. I mean, that's only going to fuel the fire for the discussion for independence,
yes,
because if they don't feel like they're being taken seriously in their current government, then they're going to want to go ahead and start their own, where they get to make their own choices and choose their future and not be subject to the whims of another, you know.
Yes. You do have this kind of quirky thing in the UK Parliament where they don't have what we call proportional representation. So you can have some members of Parliament that represent significantly less numbers of people than others. Um, it arguably, and they have the House of Lords, which is not an, I think I'm right in saying it's not an elected house at all. It's actually appointed,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is sort of like a Senate in a sense. But so there's probably the parliamentary process in the UK is probably in need of some reform anyway, structurally, I would suggest.
Yeah.
But if you think about the Scotland, sure they would even in an independent mode they would have supportive relationships with the UK when it came to issues like the armed forces. Um, the things that it's more difficult to do as one smaller country and more strategic to do together. It's in England's best interest to have a friend in Scotland, and it would always have a friend in Scotland. I mean, that's not even at question. Um, but give people their right to determine their own future. If the people of Scotland want to have, the great majority of its strategically important decisions made from their own shores, from their own land, from their own lobbying of their parliamentarians, well, that's what should happen. And you're quite right when you say that a lot of the English, a lot of the parliamentarians in Westminster are very dismissive of Scotland and treat them quite poorly, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's wild. I mean, I just think that fuels the whole conversation for Scottish independence, along with the fact that obviously Scotland doesn't want to leave the EU,
Yes.
and they're being forced now to do that. And to get back to what I was saying about what could trigger the referendum, Sharon brought it up. She's saying that if the Scottish people, it came out in a majority wanting independence, that's one way that could trigger a referendum. But what we're looking at right now, the way that they're going about triggering it, is the fact that Brexit is a huge change that the Scottish people basically aren't on board with, because they really want to stay in the EU. Most of them want to stay in
Yes.
the EU. So
Yes.
therefore, Brexit is a change that is very much affects the Scottish people. And that is
Yes.
how they're triggering this referendum. That's the route they're taking to trigger this referendum at this time. So
Yes.
I think what happens is that as this gets talked about more and more, as we're going to find out whether or not Brexit dissipates or not. If Jeremy Corbyn is able to get in and he forms a government with the Labour Party with the help of the SNP, which is probably the only way he could do it, then the only way he'd be able to do that is if he tells the SNP that they will get their referendum. So, but if Jeremy Corbyn gets in and, as he said, he wants to abandon Brexit and he actually is able to make that happen, that would basically take away the criteria for Scotland to trigger this referendum, in my mind, because Brexit is the big deal. It's the big change that's there to trigger this referendum. And if it's no longer there, there's no longer a trigger.
Well, that may well be true in terms of the momentum for it, but I don't think that in any way dissipates the in principle discussion about whether Scotland would prefer to be its own independent nation. Even in the best of relationships, I use the analogy of when children mature and leave home. They get to a point in their life where they want to be independent. They still love their parents. They still come home for visits. They still support them and care about them. So the issue of Brexit is certainly, if you like, an evocative issue that gives people this issue back in their minds. Oh, well, bugger you, Jack. If you're going to do that, we don't want to be part of the United Kingdom. It certainly is a trigger for that issue. But I think it's a healthy thing to have a discussion about independence based on, well thought through policy.
Yeah.
Um, that's the thing I said. The other thing I would want to add to this story is that, the European Union has been going a long time. It started initially as a trade organization. It was the European Economic Community, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
It might even been a one before that. But in the way we've seen it now operating, it's been in that way for quite a while. I think it's got about 27 member nations. There are some really, in my view, stubborn, hard-headed people in Europe that, sort of are bullies, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
And any organization needs to evolve. I think there are many rules about European Union membership that should be amended,
Mm-hmm.
but in no way diminish the importance of the union. I'll give you an example of that, if I may. Um, for example, because the UK has been a huge recipient of wealth as a result of being a member of the union by opening markets to Europe. But you have this no control on the borders. In other words, people can come in, they have to present ID, but they come in with no other criteria, and they access social services, which is their entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
and that happens in reverse as well. That is, British people can go over to European countries without much, if any, control and do what they want to do there. But I don't think that's a healthy thing. I feel that people should, if you're going to migrate to another country to work, there should be stricter rules about um, demonstrating your commitment to work and declaration of income from a taxation point of view. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, there's a pretty large cash economy in the UK, as there are in many countries, and a lot of people are not happy about what they see is an abuse of the UK social security system in all its elements um, by European, especially Eastern European countries whose salaries are extremely low relative to the UK, um, coming across and taking advantage of a system that
Right.
is overloaded. Now, I'm not saying that's a valid argument. All I'm just saying is that in any healthy organization, rules should be subject to review. And if there is a better way, a more efficient way, a more equitable way to structure the rules of the European Union,
Right.
that's what they should be doing. They should be looking at that and saying, well, this issue about the UK wanting to leave, as much as most thinking people don't think that's a good idea, in my opinion, it's arisen from something. So let's have a look at what are the issues, the deep issues that's given this angst to this issue, and what can we do if they're valid even at some level? What can we do to mitigate those issues in a way that the majority, or the great majority of UK citizens would be happy to remain in the union?
Right.
Because clearly, having a united Europe, like a United States, but a united Europe, has huge implications for safety and security and business and trade. It's a very healthy system to have,
Mm-hmm.
and it spreads all the way from Ireland all the way across to in Eastern Europe to Romania and down to Bulgaria and Greece. And the great majority of those countries, all in that area, which is a huge area, are all part of a common union where common standards, whether it's to do with climate change, whether it's to do with economic management, whether it's to do with, you know, social justice, are all coming together on a scale that makes a difference as a, from a Western democracy point of view. So
Mm-hmm.
the union is a good thing, but if there are little tweaky things that are not going well, look at them. Don't be so stubborn about it. Look at them and make them better for the betterment of
Well,
everyone.
virtually nothing's perfect. I mean, everything's a work in
No,
progress. So,
correct. And it's a pretty young organization overall. It's only about, I think, you know, in totality, it's only about 40 years old, or maybe it's 60 years old, 50 years old. But in its current form, it's pretty new. I think it's only about the way it's currently operating. It's probably only 35 years old, something like that.
right.
And there's been a lot of new members with the fall of the communist system in Eastern Europe. There's been a lot of new members come on board since 1989,
Right.
and so even though the organisation is fairly has been around a bit. There's a lot of members who've only been members for a relatively short period of time, and this is a long game. It's not a short game, and but I don't think that in any way diminishes Scotland's right or the efficacy of their wish, if it is in fact their wish to have their own independence and they can make their own decisions.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing for them, and they'll come together with the rest of the United Kingdom on key strategic issues, as I say, whether it's defence or foreign policy or security and so on.
Right. All right. Well, I think we've talked about some of these issues, and obviously, folks, as I said, I have something coming up a little bit later, in about 4 hours from now, from the end of this guy. I have a video where it's an upload. It's set for a premiere on this channel. Also, for those of you who are interested, in 1.5 hours, I'm going to go over and upload it right now. An hour and a half. So, an hour and a half. That would be about 7:30 Pacific time. That would be about 9:30 Central, 10:30 Eastern time. I will have a premiere starting with Mr. Hodd here, Capaldi, and myself talking about Stephen's appeal and Brendan's clemency, having a general roundabout chat about both of those subjects. So go over and check that out. Hour and a half, that premiere will start. And then, like I said, back on this channel later on tonight at 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Pacific, and which would be midnight Central, 1 o'clock Eastern time. And that's going to be another video here on this channel having to do with the Scottish independence issue and that sort of thing. So I hope to see you there. It's great to have you here, Mark. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for everyone participating.
Yep, absolutely. Everybody, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.